Of the old timers who saw the Milwaukee grow from an earlier day. This is memories. We'll have a lot of the old timers with us. Here comes old number 18 with the old majestic steam engine coming into Avery, Idaho. I do not remember this engineer's name, but I know Charlie Sleister was the fireman at that time. And of course, they change engines and engine crews. Billy Cummins was the conductor, and Johnny McAdam was the engineer on the old Westinghouse Electric. Here we have number 18 now. She's leaving Avery, Idaho. Quite a number of years ago. So long, number 18. We'll see more of you. And here we have Conductor Elmer Slater. Indeed, one of the old timers with engineer Johnny McAdam. Reading their orders and comparing time just as in the days gone by. Both of these men retired long since and have passed on to their reward. Hooter Drake is with them, and we'll see more of him too. All three of them are gone, and it is proper and fitting that we say farewell to these three gentlemen. Now we have Conductor Leaning coming in, and he is reading his orders with Engineer Vi Roberts in front of the old substation at Avery, Idaho on a good old summer day. The usual episode, comparing their watches and reading their orders. Old Dave came to the Milwaukee as Vi Roberts did too from Lines East. Worked his way through with his old caboose and anchored it there at Deer Lodge, Montana in the early days. And old Dave coughed there that time. I imagine I could hear him, just like he used to cough there. They're climbing up on their engine. Vi says, so long, we'll be on our way. Farewell, Mr. Leeming, as number 18 pulls out. So long, Dave. Now we have Conductor McConkey. Here comes a good old timer who started in railroading at Alberton, Montana, and he stayed with him ever since, and likewise with Casey Hyde. Casey Hyde says, old Mac won't be with us long here, but both of these gentlemen now have answered the final call. And to both of these gentlemen, we say, farewell, we'll see you on that distant shore. And they blow the whistle. Conductor McConkey gives the highball. And away they go. Now we have Conductor Charlie Healy. He is indeed one of the old timers too, with Engineer Drake. I told you we'd see more of Hooter. Hooter is one of the old pioneers, and he has been at these meetings, ever since they started. And he was the one that got me to come over and show my movies. Oh, well, he's not with us anymore, neither is Charlie Healy. So, we say, farewell, old-timers. We'll meet you down at the end of the track of life. And in this picture, Al gets up there. Charlie gives the highball. Hooter whistles off. Now, who do we have here? Here's Engineer Curly on a helper at Avery, Idaho. He's oiling his helper engine around, and he was one of our raw food artists. You see his lunch? Always he went to work with celery and carrots, heads of lettuce to have his lunch right with him. Curly is retired, lives at Sebring, Florida, and raises all of his own fruits and vegetables, and as he say, he eats right out of his garden. I hear from him regular. So long. Now this is down in Imperial Beach. This is 25 years after Curly retired at Deer Lodge, Montana, and I go to visit them before I leave California. That's his wife, Min, and they live at Sunset Campgrounds there at Imperial Beach. Imperial Beach is right close to the Mexican border, and we had a good visit, and we had a good long walk along the beach. We talked about the old days of long ago, and I stayed there all that night with Curly and showed him these pictures. And I says, I want to get a few more to complete the episode of Curly Etten, one of the old pioneer engineers of the good old Milwaukee Railroad. And so they came out there, and I'm making this final farewell. And I says, now listen, I'd like to have you wave goodbye to everybody. So Curly has passed away not too long ago, and we say farewell, Curly. Now, a good old-timer operator and his wife that'll work there for years. He and his wife grew old here at East Portal, over 35 years of service. Yes, truly anointed are the Gepards among the snows and ice of East Portal. Now watch Mammy hand up this here order to the caboose. Hello, there they are, rosy cheeks in the winter, taken with a troubleshooter, the old troubleshooter as a background. Highball, they say, and we say, we'll be seeing you, Gepards. But Mr. Gepard will say, farewell, Gep. And this here is the old agent Coleman at Hagen, Montana. Coleman came to the Milwaukee from Lines East. He's an old Milwaukee agent. And he is retired. He still lives at Hagen. And along Highway number 2, he sees our trains go by, and we get highballs from him often. And look here, smoking his pipe, as in the days gone by. Troy Waite, another old-time telegraph operator, puffing away on his pipe at Hagen, Montana. He's getting ready now to hand up the orders to 264. And as he does, look at the smoke puffing from his pipe. He passed away here about a month ago. We say farewell, Troy. And here, old Doc Burns, agent at Alberton for many years. Doc, another old-timer. And I am taking pictures of Doc as he through the station window there because of the close quarters and a little sunshine on him. He is taking train orders for train number 17. And visiting with us that day at Alberton was also Mr. Colhays and his staff. But they are looking the property over. But we'll see a little more of them a little later on. But I wanted to get this picture of Doc Burns. He was a good friend of mine, and his good wife was a good friend of all the railroad people. Doc is hanging up his orders now for train number 17. And about that time, Mrs. came in on the scene, and she was reluctant for me to take her picture because she had an accident with a pan of gasoline that had exploded, and it burnt her arms and her face. So she didn't want me to. I said, oh, for old time's sake, Mrs. Byrne, 2 old-timers of the Milwaukee Railroad family. And there they are. Highball, Doc says. And Mrs. Burns, we think it's wonderful for you to be with us. And here, the chief. Here's little Al Colhays. And he was really a good fellow. Everybody liked Al Colhays and his staff. Here's his chief clerk. And Eric Williams stands there with him. Also, superintendent of the signal department, Lloyd from St. Mary's is there with him. I have them line up so we can get a view of the face. Let's give them all a big hand, everybody. What do you say? Hello, Eric Williams down there. Take your hats off, fellas, so we can see who you are. And just like you were in the old days that are gone. Look at those hills in the background. That's Alberton's background. The hills that are just as permanent as the North Star. Now, at Avery, Idaho, just before he retired, I took these pictures of Earl Huzzaball. He came to Alberton many years ago, worked as a brakeman on the locals, and as conductor likewise, where old George Davenport and Harry Lewis and John Samberg and all those fellas, McConkey, they all worked together. He is in his office there now, filling out some 975 reports, them old wheel reports, you know, and or 175 reports, I guess I should have said, and he's laughing about it. Someone made a mistake, when it was a joke anyway. So Earl, he comes out into the sunlight for me to get a better picture of him. He's standing there checking some cars that the boys are switching on 264. Earl is gone. We say, farewell, Earl. We'll see you in the great beyond. And who is this here? Mr. Guy Lovely. Here's another old-timer from Alberton. He is retired and living at Alberton. So we say to him, and here is his fireman, Cliff Lynn, who's drinking his can of fruit juice, and they're taking back to Alberton one of the first Joes that ever came west. It was out here to be tried out, and we're taking it back caboose up because the wheels were not in very good shape. Hello, Guy. Better luck the next time. What do you say? Say, stop at Saltese for a little while to look the motor over. As I say, the tires were slipped or something was the matter with it. But there's the Joe that first came, the 750. That's where they named it the Little Joe. And coming into Avery, Idaho again is number 18. And who steps off of the observation car but Pat Burns? And there was the ladies there that used to water the trains and one thing another. And I send Pat back to place a torpedo on the rail. Show you what they do with them torpedoes. And I say, Pat, take your hat off so that we can see who you are. And he certainly does that. He was quite a little old Irish brakeman, always using good language. You know how they were. And I say, Pat, you get up there, give us a farewell. And Pat has passed away. And we say, farewell, Pat. We'll meet you on the distant shore. And here we have Mr. Lou Bodecker. He was quite a politician. He was once a prize fighter. And Lou was the warden of the state penitentiary when I took that picture. And then after that, he took a passenger train, and he went for a public service commission office, and later on he passed away. We say farewell to Lou Bodecker. But who is this? This is the Bonner job at Missoula, Montana. And this is Lynn Markham and good old H.H. Brown, the conductor on there for a long time. I asked Lem to come down off of his engine, and so we could get some pictures of them together. So they're reading their orders and comparing their watch, and then they will be going to work pretty soon over at the Bonner Mill, switching the Bonner Mill and switching the industrial tracks at Missoula, and out there at Primrose on the logging spur. Lou says there's a fellow fishing over. Did you see him fall in the river? So it is time to go to work. He whistles and they're coming out now onto the main track, ready to do that day's work that they have been working on the railroad. This here now is Avery, Idaho, and it is Charlie Donovan. He is getting ready to leave Avery, Idaho. I didn't get much of a picture of Charlie, but here he steps on his caboose, pulling out of the Avery yard, and I hollered to him. I said, Charlie, give us a highball. So long, Charlie. Now, this is the next day after the Pioneers meeting. I drove over to Malden to see Charlie. He'd been retired quite a number of years, and he is old and feeble there. And I said, Charlie, I want one more picture of you from the old Milwaukee. And he says, go ahead, Charlie. Wally, he says, we'll get out under the old lotus tree here at my home. He lives there all alone. His wife had passed away. Charlie, you've been one of the good old trainmen of the long ago. And all I want to say is, how great thou art, Charlie, for the work you've done for the railroad and for the Union. Downey and Cunningham, both retired, and you know Jack, he's one of our officers of our Pioneers. Jack was always known as one of the best groomed passenger conductor on the Milwaukee system. Always in his coat was a rose or some flower that somebody was always pinning on him. He lives at Spokane with us tonight. Give him a big hand, everybody, for Jack Downey. And Cunningham, I guess he lives down there in California. He says, highball, and Cunningham whistles off. Swing on there, Jack, or you'll get left. Then, here we are back at Avery, Idaho. This is the rip track. Here's another old timer, Mr. Shuck, who came from Harlowtown to Avery, Idaho as his last job. And down there on the rip track is some of the boys putting in some wheels. And Yankee, there's old Yankee, one of the old timers. He came to Avery and as a young boy, you might say, married and raised a family. He's retired now and is gone. Earl Shuck passed away, and we say farewell, Earl Shuck. But Yank comes back to Avery every once in a while, retired and lives in Minnesota. They have a little ranch property back there. But anyway, his crew, always busy regarding me taking pictures. They never paid any attention to me. Okay. Now we are presenting to you Mrs. Vivian Isadora. She is the Dean of Women Operators from Milwaukee Lines West. She worked at Missoula at this time in the good old days of the passenger train. Look at number 18 come rolling in. And who alights from that train? Nobody but Conductor Macaulay, one of the old-timers from the Coast Division. Vivian gives him his orders, and they have a friendly little chat. And who steps off of the observation car that time? L.K. Sorensen. Let's give L.K. Sorensen a big hand, one of the best general managers we've ever had. He lives and is retired at Harlowtown. Vivian hangs up the orders to the flagman, and they are on their way. Yeah, working for the railroad. Now inside, Vivian is copying some train orders, and she's going to show us a little bit of her work as an operator, as one of the old-time lady operators. Vivian Isadora, she has retired, and she lives at Missoula. I often try to get her to come over to these meetings, and I hope someday, Vivian, that you will be with us to enjoy these meetings of the old-timers. Look at that bug working. The old-time operators always telegraphed. And here, this magazine, you remember, you old-timers, Vivian won a prize, a third prize in an essay contest of the Milwaukee Railroad. Why I like to work for the Milwaukee Railroad. Among many other things she says, it is essentially a friendly road. Its record of warm friendliness among the men and women employed, along with the management, long ago gave it the name of the Milwaukee family. I do not care for abstract things or for regimentation or cold formality. On the Milwaukee Road, where each employee is an individual, a real person, and warmth and friendliness is the normal atmosphere, I find happiness. After all, what more could one wish? Vivian Isadora, telegraph operator at Missoula, Montana. We think it's a very nice story that you had, Vivian, and thanks a lot. And now, won't you step outside, Vivian, for one more little shot of the old Higgins Avenue Bridge and the old depot as you disappear beyond the doors. And we say, so long, Vivian, so long, we'll see you. This here, yeah, the old Milwaukee depot. Not much activity around there anymore. It's different. Passenger trains are gone. Here is Al Goyd, retired pioneer engineer of the Milwaukee Railroad. He stood for the helper job, the helper engineer there for many, many years. And Al is in his garden. This is one of his pastimes. His house stands in such a position that he overlooks the railroad and the shadowy St. Joe River. And he tells me, out here among my flowers, Walter, I am closer to the heart of God than any place else on earth. And I could not help but to agree with him. The hillside was a cluster, a riot of colors, of flowers in season. And this is his good wife. They are now living at Harlowtown, Montana, with their daughter Maxine, whose husband is a railroad electrician at the Harlowtown Round Office. So we say to them, so long, Mr. and Mrs. Goyd. It's sure been swell working with you all of these years. But I says, get out of that shade and let me get one final picture of you as you come underneath the arbor of vines that you have constructed. And so here we are. And I said, let's close our pictures this way, old-timers, and give everybody a farewell. Let's give them all a big hand, everybody here. So long, Mr. and Mrs. Goyd. Now, at Avery, Idaho, on number 18, Conductor, retired Conductor George Washington McGee and Chef Johnson of the long ago. They look exactly like Harry Truman and Ike Eisenhower. You remember them? Well, they're on number 18, going east, and Conductor Hollenbeck is the conductor that day. You know Conductor Hollenbeck is retired, and who is their engineer? None other but Oscar Ballas, who came to this railroad from the old Jawbone system over there at Three Forks. And Oscar has gone. We say farewell, Oscar, to you, one of the grand old engineers of the long ago. And to Hollenbeck, who is retired and lives in Florida, we say so long, Holly. We'll see you when you come back to Alberton again next year. And I said, take your cap off so nobody will doubt who it is. He's talking to George Johnson, and they're having a good old time together. So they're down there, and they're on their way, and Oscar whistles off. Now, at Missoula, Montana, we have Mr. George Baker, who was one of the old-time agents, and this is his chief operator, or clerk, I should have said, Myrtle Hamilton. Myrtle is still working there in the office, one of the few left. And she is fixing up some papers for George to sign up just before he leaves now and makes his farewell exit from the office. Myrtle is smiling and having a good time, and everybody is in good spirits. We're sometimes talking about, I wonder what we'll do, George. George says, I'm going to Florida first and get into some of those shorts down there. And then as he leans back in his chair, I says to him, George, don't you think you'll do a lot of fishing too? And he says, yes, I might do a lot of that and maybe have a beer once in a while, you know. So they step outside then. Myrtle Hamilton is with him, and one of the traffic men, and Mrs. Heigl. You'll see Mrs. Heigl come in the picture. She was one of the clerks, and she also passed away, and I'll try and call her to you when you see her in there. That's Myrtle Hamilton shaking goodbye to him. He hands over the keys. He turned the keys in the door, and he turns them over to Ralph Kuhn. Ralph came there as agent from Alberton. Ralph passed away just a few months ago. There's Heigl. And we say farewell to Ralph Kuhn. Now, back into Avery, Idaho. None other than night train director, George McCabe. George McCabe was one of the old-timers in the clerk department of the long ago. And he is the night train director there who had to do all the worrying about getting our trains out of Avery, Idaho. You know, 264 and 263. And he was one of those fellas that, just like every other railroad man around an office, they're so busy they can't go home to eat. So he had his wife bring down a nice, loving little lunch. And he was too hurrying about eating there. Just about the time he was going to drink his milk, something happened. And he said, oh, there goes that old damn telephone. They always ring, wouldn't you know it, just when a fellow wants to eat. And he calls up and he says, now, at the roundhouse, what do you fellas want down there? For heaven's sake, can't you let a fella eat? Anyway, George says, how about 264? Are they making up down there in the yard? And the conductor says, yes. We said, we'll be ready to go in about another half an hour. Well, he says the dispatcher is just raising Cain. And Mr. Coles wants to know what's going on down there. For heaven's sakes, get to moving. So he says, I got a little more figuring out to do in here. And he says, just a minute, I want to call up St. Mary's on the radio. And that train that's behind 264, say, have them head in on number 1 track without fail. Number 15's right on time. So that's the way it goes with a train director. And then comes the time, the parting of the ways. And Mac, happy retirement. So the next day, we have them take this outside. And here they are all saying, well, it's farewell in a way, but, you know, just au revoir, but not goodbye, Mac. Mac is with us tonight. Why, everybody, give him a big hand. And who do we have in the picture? There's Operator Jones, and the little fellow with the white cap is Francisco. He is the man that relieved him and is now at Avery. There's Mr. Ranny's in the picture, Wally Moore, and Mrs. Wally Moore, and some other fellows be coming in there. And Francisco's father, he's standing in the middle with the green shirt. His father built the tracks into Avery, Idaho in the early days. And his father just passed away in Harlowtown recently. Here's the close-up of Mac. Everybody with a big hand. Mac, we're glad to have you come to these meetings, old-timers. And this is the end of reel number 2. But We'll be back. We'll be back in just a little while. And we all here at this meeting tonight a second reel of the old pioneers and veterans Milwaukee Railroad. Now we have Conductor Meeks making his last run, and Agent Hopkins at Deer Lodge is bidding him goodbye, and some of the other boys is Brakeman Googe and Quaid is there. Also George Bird and some other clerk down there at the depot. Then we have the train is in town. Passengers are all out looking around at Deer Lodge there. And then we go down to the motor and we find down here his engineer. That's Carl Schreiber, forgive me. Carl Schreiber is who it is. And they're reading their orders, and that's Tom Cooper with him. And from his baggage car comes Johnny Mott, an old-time baggage man. And they're talking things over about this last run. But it's not going to be as bad as they think it is. Everything's going to go all right. There's Johnny smoking his cigar just the same as usual. And Meek says, "Highball, let's go." Percy Harnick is up there in the cab and he says, "So long, we'll be seeing you." "So long, Meeks." And there goes the Olympian Hiawatha down over the trail just like in the days gone by. Then we have Percy Harnick and Hutchison. Both of these men now are retired, and Hutch lives in Deer Lodge. Percy Harnick, retired and lives in Deer Lodge. Let's give them all a big hand. What do you say? All right, on your way, boys. And Percy climbs to the cab of the engine, and away they go. Here we have Conductor Falk with us, and he's making one of his last runs. He is signing up the register now, and Ray Falk has passed away here not too long ago, and we say farewell to Ray Falk. And his engineer on that day was Billy Craig. Billy is living in Deer Lodge, and he is still working. They come out into the sunshine so we can get a better picture of them, and they're all in a jovial mood. Matt Feastel is there. Maybe Matt Feastel is with us tonight. Anyway, let's give all these boys a big hand. What do you say? There's Mr. Leo Prowl, who succeeded Ray as the conductor. And they are talking things over, wishing Mr. Falk all the good things of life. And here comes his train into town. Here comes number 16 from Chicago, or number 15 from Chicago, I should have said. And Ray is ready to mount back the old cars, and there getting off of the coach now is Jitney Johnson, an old veteran conductor of the East Rocky Mountain. All right, Ray, let's climb aboard and get this train into Spokane on time. What do you say? Okay. Billy Craig climbs to the cabin, and he is on his way. Mr. Quinn, traveling engineer of the East Rocky Mountain, mounts the cabin there for a final word while they are finishing up the water and the oil on the diesel units. So long, Billy. And to you, Ray Falk, not only so long and farewell. There goes old number 15 again. Seattle bound. And then Johnny Mott. He has with him there over 40 years of receipts in the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. A member of the Alberton Lodge, number 834. And Johnny was always very proud of his receipts and his membership in the Brotherhood. So we had him pack them all together and bring them up here to Deer Lodge so as we can put them into our movie. just to make a little something unusual. You've seen him before in some of the other pictures. And Johnny is retired, he lives in Spokane, and I wish Johnny would come up to our meeting sometime and be with us. He promised me that he would, but I haven't been able to catch up with him. Anyway, there's Johnny's 40-year pin in the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. So John says, so long, fellas. I'll see some of you in Spokane from time to time. And we say, so long, Johnny. We'll be seeing you. So long. Then, at Deer Lodge, Montana, again on train number 15, the Olympian Hiawatha, we have veteran engineer Francis Sexton with Conductor Hutchison. Always like to have Hutch there because he makes a good passenger conductor in the movies. And his wife, Francis Sexton's wife, Christine, was at the depot, and she pins this flower on Francis and kisses him goodbye and says, this is almost an episode like Casey Jones when he kissed his wife at the station door. You remember how the song went? Anyway, Christine wishes him well there at Deer Lodge. And I ride in the cabin with Francis down to Missoula, and I take some pictures too as Francis is driving his Polar Bear motor on the old General Electric Polar Bears. And here's Francis, he's on his way, and down through Garrison we come. And as you look way down below there, you'll see the mouth of a tunnel showing up pretty soon. Well, we'll dash through that tunnel and then come out the other side. Here we come. Then down through a station called Gold Creek and on to Drummond. Francis calls out, clear board. I answer to him, a clear board. Whistle over the crossing, and we're on our way. Francis looks at his watch and says, we're right on time. Good old Milwaukee standard. And then at Missoula, Montana, on the switch run, the youngest of the Milwaukee pioneers, Harold Terriall, engineer, with his conductor, George Heckeroff. Harold is working on the Bonner job at the present time and is making plans now to retire pretty soon. So Harold will get up into his cab and we'll have a picture of him sitting at the throttle there with his brake valve just before he commences the day of hard work, switching Missoula, Bonner, and Waldorf plants. Here comes George Hickaroth out of his caboose door, and they're backing down to West Missoula to do a job switching before they leave. Anyway, so long, Harold. We'll be seeing you. And now at Alberton, train number 264, Wally Jones, retired, living at Deer Lodge. Wally's been with the Milwaukee for a good many years, almost 50 years. So long, Wally. Have a good run on your 264. And look at these here double Joes and a diesel synchronized, which gives these Milwaukee trains 264 and 263 very fast and efficient run. So long, Wally. We'll be seeing you from time to time. And then, Ann Goldie, I got her picture on train number 17 sitting in the day coach with a weak sun and not much light. But let's give Ann Goldie a big hand. She was the general manager's chief clerk when I got that picture. A big hand for Goldie. Now, let's go to Tacoma. This, the Milwaukee depot, the brand new depot. And out under the train shed stands train number 16, all groomed and polished and shined for her famous trip to Chicago, the Milwaukee Road passenger station. There's the train out there now, and we'll go down towards the engine, and we will have the conductor, Kemp Robinson, walking into the scene. That is his train. You notice how the train is pulled backwards over to Seattle. That was the old way of doing it. Hello, Kemp. Kemp is retired, lives at Tacoma. He's one of the old-time pioneers and veterans of the Milwaukee Railroad. And who is this? His engineer, Sam Wynn. Sam is with us tonight, always with us at these meetings. Let's give Sam and Kemp a big hand, two old-timers. Look at Sam there. It looks just as young as when he left the Missoula Division 30 years ago. They take off their caps. They compared their watches and talk over their run. And one thing another like old-timers do, like we've all done in the days gone by. Sam mounts to the cabin. There he is, a hoghead, a real hoghead. Kemp says, all right, Sam, I'm going to walk back and get on the train. The porter's there wishing Kemp a successful trip on his last trip. And as you know, leaving Tacoma, this is the familiar sight, Mount Rainier in the distance, that they always seen on their initial run. Some people call it Mount Tacoma, Mount Auburn, but it's Mount Rainier, so I'm told. Now, back into Avery, Idaho, and none other but that good old hoghead, passenger engineer Lee Foreman. Lee Foreman and his wife probably are with us tonight. Let's give Lee a big hand. What do you say? Lee is reading in his orders, and he says, say, that dispatcher, I guess, is going to stick us again. He's always pulling something funny in them orders. He had to laugh over it. So he says, anyway, I guess they're the boss. Let's go. And he mounts to the cabin of the engine. What's that, a highball? Okay, he says. All right, let's go. What's holding us? Then, into the Pioneers meeting, just like we have here today. There's Sam Wynn when he was president, and there's his secretary and treasurer, Mr. Copeland. You can't see him now. And there's Mr. Grobel, who has succeeded Sam, and you'll see them milling around. There is George Lucelle in there. And this engineer with the white shirt, I can't call his name, I'm sorry. And there's Walter Harnick, veteran baggage man, and Lee Foreman, and as I said, Lucelle is there. There is Jack Downey, and look at Gil Johnson, and Feeble Corn, all the way from Kansas City. And look at Mr. Steggy, that old-timer from Malden. Good old Dick Steggy. Then, there is P.T. O'Neill, came to the Milwaukee from the Ponderay, a veteran, master mechanic, 92 years of age when I took that picture. He is gone. Let's say farewell to Mr. O'Neill, a grand old man. And he is flanked by Dick Steggy. Look, George McCabe, night train director from Avery, Idaho, who gets the trains out on time. In the background, I can't call that gentleman's name, but you all know, harp up his name if you can. And who is this? None other but Lou Gardner. He is tending bar for the old Pioneers, and he is serving them nothing more than 7-Up and good old Coca-Cola. Did you see Hooter Drake back in there? Yeah, and this fella here is an old-time engineer off of the Coast Division. I can't call his name. Some of you holler it out as they mill around. Feeble Corn again, and Gil Johnson. Cut out that highball stuff, boys. You're supposed to be drinking Coca-Cola. But you can't keep a good man down. Say, there in the lobby of the hotel was Hooter Drake and his latest wife. Both of them have passed away quite a while ago. And we say farewell to Owl Drake, a good old pioneer engineer from Deer Lodge. We say farewell to both of them. And look at Shorty Mason there, still going strong. And who is this? Our present secretary and treasurer, Fred Lillowit, agent at Calder. This is one time of the year when Fred gets a chance to catch up on his books, and he says, I'm short on money. These fellas are not paying their dues, Mr. Grobel. He says, what will I do? Mr. Grobel says, be patient, they'll pay up. So they're laughing over it. Let's give them a big hand, the officers of our organization. Fred Lillowit, Mr. Grobel. And here's Mr. Feeblecorn with two of his old-time brakemen. None other but Ross Snyder and Ben Casey, just as in the days gone by. And here's Moore, resident engineer who built the Milwaukee Railroad from Hagen to Roland. Resident engineer Taft. And here's a little bit more milling around to the boys, Sam Wynn, and all of them. They are milling around there, and this will bring our picture then pretty close to a close. Yeah, may old acquaintance be forgotten. We'll be seeing you next year, fellas. And then outside of the hotel there was Shriners were meeting. And this is their mascot lady from Hawaiian. She's a Hawaiian girl. Now you be careful, you boys. And this is just a movie of the old timers, you remember. That's Frank Gusson.
Go.
After the meeting of the pioneers at Spokane, the next day I went over to Malden to visit Mr. and Mrs. Steggy. Old Dick Steggy, he was the one that brought the first train into St. Mary's way back in 1908. Him and, well, anyway, this is their home there at Malden. And they are, it's a beautiful day. We talk about the old days of long ago and the old Milwaukee Railroad. And I say, give us a farewell. I want to get you as the last picture in my movies of the old timers, Nick. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Joe Dunlap, Engineer Dunlap, one of the old pioneers of the Milwaukee Railroad. After retirement, he went down to Hemet, California, and he bought a home down there, and this is one of his gardens. So he took Mrs. Miller and I around through his gardens, and he says how different this garden is from those up around Missoula, Montana, and in Avery, Idaho. And I said, it sure is, Joe. And he says, be careful when you're back around, because you'll get a lot of those stickers from those great big needles sticking out on all of these palms and cactuses. So he says, Walter, you ought to get a picture of the house over there, and you and Mildred ought to be standing in it. I says, that's what I want. Anything that we can bring into these movies. And he says, give my regards to all the old timers. Now, I says, here is his house that he built, and that's Mrs. Miller over there, Mildred. And Mrs. Dunlap's name is Nellie, as you'll all remember, and he is Joe. And they are the old people of the Milwaukee Railroad. So long. Now, here we have the Brodigans at one of the beaches there in California, and I went over to see them before I left, and I showed them these pictures. And Brodigan and his wife Mina and Hanson's that were at the Roundhouse at that time, and we all had a great big dinner together, and we showed our movies, and they really enjoyed it. So I says, I want you all to come out here and be prepared so as we can put them in there in the movies. Now here I am. This is your Walt Miller, your conductor, and your producer and everything, and I am going through the coaches now, and the sleeping cars, getting some of the tickets taken care of so the passengers can retire without being bothered again. So this is what this here movie of is, your producer and your movie man, Conductor Walt Miller. So, stop it. So I knock on the door in there, and I have the passengers come up there, and I check their tickets and wish them a very successful trip on our train. They are going back to Chicago, and they thanked me very kindly, and they said, oh, you Milwaukee conductors are always so kind to everybody. We love to travel your railroad. I says, thank you, Mom. And they asked me what the time was and all that, and I says, good night and a happy journey to you. So I go over to the next room and I check some more passengers in there, and knocking on the door, and I'm fixing up the tickets for them. So this is old Walt Miller back in the old days, 30 years ago. Now this is at Hemet, California, and this is old Conductor Stiles and his wife Mary. They're retired and live down there in Felix Cottage right next to us. So Mom and Mary and Frank are there. Frank and Mary come from Mobridge, South Dakota, old pioneer people of the Milwaukee Railroad at Mobridge, South Dakota. And we're from Montana, so we really got mixed up the good there. So I said, wave worked for the old Milwaukee Railroad, Frank and Mary, and they did. And then later on, we came back to Montana, and Frank and Mary went back there. Now here's the scene at Anacortes. This is where they opened up the People's Bank. And this here is one of the old timers of the Milwaukee Railroad. That's Mr. Green, Joshua Green. And we talked over old times about the Milwaukee Railroad, and I was down to the bank. And he was one of the directors of our railroad. And I handled him when I was just a young fellow and a flagman on the Board of Directors Special Train. And he opened up the bank here, and I says, come out in front, will you, Mr. Green, so as I can get a close-up picture of you. And look at the big flowers in their coats. It was quite an event at Anacortes that day. And he says, Walter, he says, if you got any money, the Milwaukee people, come on down there and put it in People's Bank. And so that's the way we work it here with these old timers of the Milwaukee Railroad. And I always call Mr. Green is one of the old timers of the long ago. He is 102 years of age, and he passed away not so long ago. Now, here is your Walt Miller, your photographer, your producer of the movies, and keeping the record. Now, to all the old timers who are still with us, we say, so long, fellow workers, we'll be seeing you. But to those who have arrived at the final terminal, we say, farewell until we meet at the end of the track of life in a grand reunion with our Savior. Some blissful morning beyond the sunset. Keep it going. Now, this sunset here was taken at Mobridge, South Dakota, as the train number 17 passed over the Missouri River Bridge that day when I was coming home. And it is a beautiful sunset to wind up this pictures. And I always said, I hope that there'll be enough clouds.
Railroad, taken in different times of the year. Some of it in the early fall, and a lot of it in the taken in different times of the year. Some of it in the early fall, and a lot of it in the dead of the winter. This is at Superior, Montana. This is the Cabinet Range, just between Superior and St. Regis. The picture was taken in different aspects, and this is Old Baldy at Ashmore. This is Old Elk Mountain, as we call it, near the Nancy Lee mine. We're taking it from the rear end of our caboose. This is early in the fall, the St. Regis River there, or the Clark Fork of the Columbia. And we are taking siding at St. Regis for an eastbound freight train. Now, this is a picture of a heavy tonnage train over the Bitterroot Mountains from Avery, Idaho to Hagen, Montana. It is quite a torturous trail. It has almost a 2% grade. And we are having 5,000 tons behind us now, and we're going up the hill with one large helper in the center. Looking back out of the caboose is the Old Baldy Mountain up there with a lookout on top of it. And this picture, we're getting close now to Falcon, Idaho. And we're going to meet a freight train, a westbound freight train there. They are on the siding for us. And as we approach here, you notice the different times of the year, the snow is not quite so deep, but we'll put them all together and eventually get a little story. Here, looking up there is where the St. Paul Pass Tunnel is, over there in the mountains, top of the hill. This is a picture of Sheepfoot Mountain, and looking back along our train. This is one of the many tunnels on the mountain, and from the highest bridge on the hill, we'll look down into Clear Creek. This is a 275-foot bridge, and that's Clear Creek down in there. And then we continue on up the hill to a place called Adair. And we go around a large loop there, and from the left-hand side of the picture is the track that we just came over. And you will see the track in different spots as you look over there. Look back towards Falcon. Now here's another picture taken at a different time of the year as we are practically at the same point near Adair, Idaho. Snow is all fresh and nice and clean, as you can see. Here we are now taking the pictures from the top of the boxcar over our motor, and we are approaching a station called Roland, Idaho. This is the top of the Bitterroot Mountains, and where we enter the St. Paul Pass Tunnel, just above Taft. That's Sheepfoot Mountain back in the picture there, and you'll see more of that as we continue on in this picture. We'll build a picture around Sheepfoot Mountain and one of the big slides that came down. Now, the title, Sheepfoot Mountain, Falcon, Idaho. We call it the mighty sentinel of the Bitterroot. When it is clothed in a mantless snow, it is always glamorous. There it is there. We stopped our freight train one day for some unusual cause, and we took this picture of the Sheepfoot Mountain just above Falcon. It is majestic, almost like the Alps and scenic. And that picture there is where the slide came down. And we'll build a picture around that a little later on. That's the same mountain on a different day. But you can see where the snow could have slid down through that hard sweep of snow to the right of the picture. And we'll get another view of this on one early morning as we came out of the St. Paul Pass Tunnel. One cold morning, and you notice how the shadows are still casting down into the valleys and into the gulches of the mountain. There is Sheepfoot Slide right there again. And we'll bring our pictures around to that pretty shortly so you can see how the railroad boys work. I'm sure you boys on the NP, you've got the same scenic beauty in your mountains where you traverse your line just the same as we have. Because I've been over the NP line and I know. And the boys over there in the Cascades, they have similar sights. But of course we play around there in the Bitterroot. Now, Winter in the Bitterroot, the short story dedicated to the boys of the Milwaukee Railroad. People who live and labor in the Bitterroot Mountain know that winter can descend on that rain suddenly and in all its fury, smothering everything in a blanket of snow. That was the winter of 42 and 43. So we dedicate these pictures to the Milwaukee boys, showing them as they go about their duties, clear away the snow laid down by a recent storm. Look at, this is East Portal, Montana, right at the top of the Bitterroots, and that's a substation. And those little houses in there, they look small now, the bungalows where the boys and the operators live. Here we have the picture of the snow outfit, and there is a brake beam down on the equipment, so the boys are repairing that before we pass through the St. Paul Pass Tunnel. In the picture, we have Harry Spears, and Pete Falls, and Harry Brash. We have Eric Williams, and I said Harry Spears again, and a few of the boys, the section boys. Now, the Snow Kings of the day, Eric Williams, traveling engineer, Harry Spears, roadmaster, and the section boys from Avian Falcon, and the train conductor, H.H. Brown. He's here with us. Let's give Brownie a big hand. Here they line up before the wheel. Eric Williams in the light overhaul. There he is right there. That's Eric Williams. Give him a big hand. And then there's Harry Spears to the right. And there's the section boys. Johnny Ruscio, just those boys. Here's a picture of Jim Hayes. He's in the picture, our train master at that time. And Tony Spatafort, the roadmaster, assistant roadmaster with Harry Spears. And also in that picture was Ellie Boyd. I got them pictures so that I could have a record. Now, the crew is going to mount the cabin. Now, what's the snow fly, boys? This is a picture of a mighty force working in the Bitterroots, the old
snowplow. There's Jim Hayes, our train master. He's now in the east with a big official job. Here we are going to clean out some of the tracks at East Portal. Look at the black smoke roll. No, that fella is not using a number 4 scoop because they burn oil on this locomotive. But he's sure pouring it good. And that thing is jumping up and down when that wheel is throwing that snow down into the valley below. This here is at East Portal, Montana, and we'll show you how we go about the duties now. The makeup of the train, the motor ahead, and then comes the flanger, and then the caboose and the cut widener, and the rotary right ahead of everything. Now here they are coming up the main track at East Portal, Montana, and they are clearing away so that they had already previously pulled in with their wings onto the main track. And I'm getting a close-up of it. Look at the black smoke roll again. This is a picture of the rotary working, taken from a passing freight train, throwing the snow over the camp. Now here is that cut widener behind the caboose. It always does a good job. This has been one of the inventions of the Milwaukee Railroad. Milwaukee shops built it under the directions of Mr. Sorensen, Mr. Spears, and Mr. Colhays. Now, the wings are adjusted outward to lock so they can pull the snow in. The snow will be bulldozed over or thrown out with the wheel down into the canyon below. Any method, just to get it clear of the tracks, so the fast Milwaukee trains can go through. Now, here is the finished product at East Portal. Notice the sides, how they are trimmed down. Main line is all clear, ready for another storm. This is Mike Ferris, section boss at East Portal that year, who shoveled out the path to the bungalows so the boys could get into their homes. I have my little brakeman, Nicky Batch, come out there. They compare him with the depth of the snow. And when he comes out, I says, Nick, take my camera so as I can get up on that snow pile and climb over onto the roof of the bungalow, just for a little demonstration of how the snow is piled up there by the shovels and snow plows and everything else. Underneath there's a house. This here is the troubleshooter crew. Oh, there's Mark Kent there, and George Jurgensen, and Lloyd Dufault, and one of the Gustafson boys, Ted, and so the boys are going to crawl up on top of the movable platform and give you a demonstration. This is a highly insulated, naturally. So as the boys will not be on top of the movable platform and give you a demonstration. This is a highly insulated, naturally. So as the boys will not be injured by electric shock from the high-tension wires. It is a very efficient job, and these men love their jobs very well. Now, they live and they eat all week long on this car. Down in the little cubicule is
Joe Kingham. Joe Kingham.
He used to be cook in the old logging camps up the 9 Mile for the ACM. And Joe is cooking on this troubleshooter, and down in this place is where he works miracles. Now these boys have special days, roast beef, roast turkey. Oh, and today they're going to have roast chicken. Well, Joe, it looks to me as though it's well done. It's nice brown on that. So Joe says, I'll taste it and find out. He says, yeah, well, says it's pretty good stuff. I think I'll let the boys come down and eat pretty quick. So he says, I think I should clean out all my green stuff because it's Friday and we'll have to go in tomorrow. So he's fixing up some lettuce. He's going to wash it a little later on. And no strawberries. Get all the sand off them so those tough guys won't have to eat them. Now, here we are at Falcon, Idaho. And this is where the snow slide came down. Everything was down, trolley and all. While that happened, Ralph Townsend Markham was listening in, chief operator in Avery, Idaho, and he says, uh-oh, there goes my bells, boys. He says, I gotta get busy. Just about that time, all the switches blew out, and he heard the explosion, and Ralph runs back there into the rear of the substation to pull the switches. Now, you can see his hand. This is a dark picture. But you can see he's turning down the rheostats rapidly and pulling all the switches to kill the line. Yeah. Ralph says safety is of the first importance to the discharge of duty. And sure enough it is. Now, the boys can go to work. See the trolley all laying around here? We have a steam engine with us that day. We make our passes on the siding. And then the boys will go to work. The troubleshooter boys will go to work laying poles and putting back the trolley. Now, this picture was taken in the spring of the year, but it is equivalent to the same work that you would see them do if you were there at the snow slide. Here they are, bringing back together again the feeder wire for the trolley. And there's George Jurgensen. He's the foreman of the job, laying out plans and instructions of what next to do. Up there is Lloyd Duval and Olivery, both good, efficient workers on the troubleshooter. Just as we took that picture, began some snowflakes to be coming down. They move up to another spot. As they do that, look, the boat cook says, "Come on and get it, you fellers, or I'll throw it out." So down the ladders they came. They wasn't going to let anybody throw that food out. They were hungry. And in there they had that chicken and stuff that you see. Now, I always like to tell my audience that all of this is done so that the Milwaukee trains can go through. Here is the fast mail over on Turkey Creek Bridge at Adair, Idaho. We're standing across the bridges there in the valley, and we watch the train as it comes up the loop and circles the loop and comes into the siding, and we are going to meet them there. This is train number 18 that leaves Tacoma for Seattle every day, or it used to leave every day. The train now, of course, has been abandoned. But here it is. Gil Johnson was the conductor of that train that day, and that's Gil giving us a little signal. But let's turn a little more light on that. I don't like, there it is. The train now, of course, has been abandoned. But here it is. Gil Johnson was the conductor of that train that day, and that's Gil giving us a little signal. But let's turn a little more light on that. I don't like, there it is. And the passengers on the observation waved at us as we went down around the loop. Here is the Olympian Hiawatha when it was late due to a snowstorm at Drexel, Montana. Now, a tough day behind us, and we are going to scamper homeward to Avery, Idaho, just as the sun sinks in the west. The boys now are all glad. They're tired, 16 hours practically, and they want to get down to the interstate beanery and get a good feed, and get one of them good soft beds over there at the bunkhouse. Well, folks, this is the end. I hope that you'll enjoy it, and the Oldtimers pictures are next.
This is our Olympian Hiawatha going up there near Avery, Idaho, and at Falcon and Adair, and it's on its way east over to Three Forks, Montana. And this is this here scene here is one here at East Portal, and then the next one is Three Forks. And number 16 is arriving there. There is a Western Days at Three Forks, and the Indian tribe has come over to greet the Olympian Hiawatha and to entertain the passengers that were going down to Yellowstone Park. And that completes that part of it. These here are just some blank pictures of the Ramona at Hemet, but they don't mean anything in here. Now, Ed. All right, the story of Avery, Idaho. A river, a railroad. This trinity makes Avery, Idaho. It is fitting that we people who live along the Milwaukee Railroad and the shores of the St. Joe, that we should make a story of the railroad and the river of the St. Joe. You can't vision Avery without the St. Joe any more than you could without the Milwaukee Railroad. So that's what this little story about. This is the East Yard at Avery, Idaho. And this here is the substation and the hotel, the old schoolhouse, the railroad depot, and then looking westward down towards the roundhouse. Now here is the springtime of the year, summertime. We look at all the poplar trees along the railroad and separates the St. Joe River from the tracks. Here is the steam engine train. They're making up, going to Malden, Washington. That was there. One of Charlie Donovan making up down there. And here is the brand new schoolhouse that was built here. And look at here. This is number 264. Making up in the West Yard. Now we take these pictures here from the bridge. The Joe flows majestically. And this is a summertime scene of that famous old trout stream, St. Joe River, the shadowy St. Joe, right along our tracks at Avery, Idaho. Now, looking east toward the rising sun, the shadowy St. Joe turns to silver. Look at the silver on that there, and the sun is coming up there. It makes a spectacular sight on a glorious sunny day. And that's the way we used to see it, us railroad men and the fishermen that come in there from the big cities to fish. Now, the St. Joe is flowing on, and it is a great trout stream. Now, here is some of the inhabitants, the game trout. You see all those trout down in there. They are numerous in the big holes and around the rocks. And people all the time, they throw food in there. Just the same as they do at the east end of the depot. There's a fish pond there where the passengers would always take and feed the trout. These were back in those olden days now, the Milwaukee Railroad. The shadowy St. Joe River, as it flows on during the seasons, it is similar to the lives of men. Look at here now. Our lives are like the rivers that flow, the poets have said. Here's a raging torrent rushing on madly. Now watch this there. In the spring of the year, the great rapids come down there, and it's a good thing the banks are all taken care of with big rocks. Yeah. And here, the river is coming in torrents, and you see there's trees and logs and everything flying down there. Here's a peaceful brooklet, though. The water is going down, and see the close-up of the rocks in the bottom of the creek. We call it a peaceful brooklet. The poets have said that there is a sermon in every rock, and we used to often wonder about that when we were fishing for trout. Now, this is the old roundhouse down in there, but you know, all rivers meet at sea, and this is the Rogue River as it tumbled and out of the mountains of the Oregon and meet at Wedderburn, Oregon. And we took these pictures to fit in with it. This is Wedderburn, and that's where the rivers meet at sea. They all kind of calm and everything before they join up with the waters of Mother Sea. Now, back to the Idaho country, the evergreen trees along the banks of the railroad. Their shiny needle fingers of summer have now turned to arms of ermine. Look at those there needles in the summertime, they're oily. And then comes the winter, and the pine needles are all covered with snow, and they bring on arms of ermine. They are a fantastic sight. Something that everyone should see, and we do see there in Montana. So as we pass through this picture and you enjoy it, we'll bring on some of the other sights that you'll see pretty rapidly. Now, with this little bit of music finished in there, it might set it off. Now we are back in Avery in the wintertime. This is the winters of 48 and 49. It was a winter of deep snow. And the river had been all frozen over. But this picture here was taken up where the North Fork of the St. Joe flows and meets into the main river. And you notice the deer over there plowing through the snow, the deep snow. They have a difficult time getting through. The snow is hard crusted, and they have most difficult time trying to live. But the forestry at Avery, they would put out large bales of hay at night to feed the starving game. Now, pretty soon now, I am walking up the creek, and this is the dog here that followed me up here. He always goes out and calls crews with the callers in the winter and summer. His name is Ginger. So Ginger is over in there, and I say, get down there, Ginger, and get into that picture. There he is. So, more pictures now along there. The confluence of the North Fork and the main river here is at the main river bridge at East Avery. Here's the sign, all covered with snow. North Fork of St. Joe River. And there's the confluence right there, the main river and the North Fork. Notice how the currents of water just keep a path cut down through the ice and snow. Yeah. So we'll get over to those pictures now. This is down near the depot, and it's coming into the dead of winter and lots of snow. The snow is rapidly falling there on that special day, and that was one big night that the rotary snowplow went out that you've seen working there. This is the power station across there. Now, the winter of 49, starving game on the river ice. There are great bands of elk and deer. And as I walk up the creek getting pictures of them, I arouse them, and I stir up several bunches of deer, and we'll pick them up as we go up the creek. Now here they are stirred up, and they see me over there across the river, and they are getting together. Now here's a large band that we ran into up on the main river, and they are milling about, and they are excited, and they're going back up the main river to get away from me. But they'll be down this evening for to get that hay laid out by the Forestry Service. And everybody tries to get pictures of them. So I put them here in my movies of the Milwaukee Railroad. Look, here comes some elk. You'll see how they lope along. There's a great big elk going along there now, loping along. And we have them all stirred up. But anyway, this is just a little side view from Avery, Idaho, and to fit into our railroad pictures. Now it comes the dead of winter, and the St. Joe sleeps. She is all frozen over. We had a big spell of cold weather. That's the roundhouse over there. The whole river is frozen over solid, and the water is running low underneath and murmurs. This is the east yard. There's a few cars in there, but always after a winter you'll have a summer anyway, and the fishermen are out there. Lo, who is this? This is Jackie Felton, conductor out of Malden, Washington, and he is in here on his layover time, and he is fishing in the shadowy St. Joe. Jackie Felton is an expert fisherman, and he says, Walt, he says, I'm using a St. Joe special today. And I said, well, that's good enough, Jackie. But I says, I want you to catch a few fish here so as I can put you in my movies of Avery, Idaho. And he says, go to it. He says, here we got one already. So he says, I'll walk over to the shore, Walt, and you get this in your camera. So here's one of the fish that Jackie is bringing in. And In his basket already, he had 4 or 5 just that same size. Jackie Felton is the son of old pioneer conductor Felton, who came there in the early days with the Milwaukee back in 1908. He was one of the early day conductors, and this is Jack, his son. So I thank Jack for his pictures, and he says, I'll have to fill this basket, Walt, before I go. Well, anyway, the Avery St. Joe Sportsman's Club had a big picnic down at Slate Creek, a mile down west of Avery. This is some of the scenes around there. Loretta Faust and Felix Marcello's wife, Grace, is there. This is Janice Whitaker, Janice Campen. I says, how are you doing, Janice? Oh, she says, I'm frying fish for everybody. Well, I says, get your pan up here so as I can get some pictures. And there they are, and they were beautifully browned. So I says, turn them over there, old girl, so as we can see what you're doing. She is an operator there, Janice is. And there's Du Bois, one of the conductors on the Rocky Mountain. And there's Sullivan and Dunlap and Moreland from Malden and Ernie Dunlap and some of the boys from the substation and the Big Bird family is there, and Elizabeth, the bean rehasher, and this is Mrs. Townsend, and they're all watching the events. And there's Moreland from Malden, Washington. He is a conductor on the West End. So they're very serious about their food. And this is Elizabeth, the bean rehasher. She says, there you have it, boys. And there's Cliff Runyon there, eating with one of the girls. There's Martin Lynch. There's Frank Kroll. He is the son of old Frank Kroll that run the wrecker. This here is the engineer Sullivan and Dunlap, and they're having their coffee. So the picnic goes on. It lasted all day long. And I just took these pictures at random. There is Ralph Townsend, substation operator, and his wife, and one of the helpers there. And they are very nice. And this people here took care of the Antler Saloon. One of them, Verge and Bill, and I forget their last name, Williams, I think it was. So here is another picture around the serving tables at the picnic. And there are numerous peoples there. There is Ralph Dools. Yeah, here's a picture of an engineer off of the Malden division there, and a signal maintainer. Now I kind of forget their names, but anyway, a lot of you fellas that are watching this here, you come there. Now here is a lady that was hired by the picnic to come over from Spokane and entertain the crowd. And she was a very lovely lady, and she threw kisses, and she sang, and she played the banjo and everything else. This is some more of the boys of the Milwaukee, and they're all drinking Coca-Cola, you know, and they're swaying with it, and never thought that Coca-Cola would do that. But anyway, here's Mrs. Ginger Rogers. She was one of the chairmen, and this is Floss Pears. She is the wife of Hardy Pears of the long ago. And they are getting the tickets ready now for a big raffle. And they're having a lot of fun. This is Ruth Lindahl, 32 years as postmaster at Avery, Idaho, and she's running a free taxi. Thank you, Ruth, for that. And this here is one of the other ladies, and these are some of the operators and their wives joining the crowd. This is Loretta Faust again, and she's fixing up her fish down there with this, and with Janice. This is the substation family from East Portal, the Thompsons, substation operator. They came down to the picnic and to join in with the fun, because you don't have a picnic all the time. Now, this is Frank Kroll and his sister Mena, old-time people of Avery, Idaho. John Spielis is there and his wife. And one of the younger girls of the families. This is Mr. and Mrs. Ginger Rogers, the chairman and the co-chairman of the big picnic. Very fine couple. And I wanted to be sure and get them in there on the Avery Sportsman. Now here, the forestry. Avery wouldn't be complete without the forestry. I call them the forest gods. And I says, take off your hats, you fellas, because a lot of, there's Williams, McLaughlin, and then there's Lynch, and there's Costello. They're all old timers of the forestry. So Art Lynch is there. Now this is that engineer, Putman, old Putman, passenger engineer, pioneer of the long ago. He brought the first train into St. Mary's, him and Conductor Steggy. All right, Put, we enjoyed that. Now here we have again, this is Ruth and her free taxi. Thank you, Ruth, for bringing everybody down to the picnic. We sure appreciate that. And Ruth says, thank you, Walt. She says so much for that. So here she goes back now for another load. Now, the tickets were all sold on the raffle of the donkey, the white mule. And the party that won it was a great big family, the Bird family. And they're all around there, that great big family, and they're proud that they've won that mule, and they're getting ready to take it home. So I take a few pictures of the Bird family. There's Felix Marcello and his wife Grace, and there's Hanson of the Roundhouse foreman and his wife. The Hansons now live down in Seal Beach, California. Now here's Art Lynch, one of those there forest gods, and he says, Walter, I've just come back out of the hills of prospecting. And he says, do you know something? There's gold back in them thar hills. And I says, I know it, Art. You brought in lots of nuggets, and I've seen them, and I know. Anyway, we change the subject now, and we'll go up on the hill, and here's Mahoney's Tavern. They are a good couple, and we call this the Fisherman's Paradise. Would you know that more fish are caught here than any place else on earth, right in this tavern? And we'll have a little episode of that. So Bud and Lucy come out. That's Bud and Lucy Mahoney. And they take care of the tavern. Lucy was a good piano player and everything, and it was wonderful, the party we had in there. Now, we're going to go inside. Bud is setting up the drinks, and he's pouring out that there old Highlander beer, Bohemia, Schlitz, and anything else you want. It sounds almost like a commercial, don't it? Lucy says, there, I'm going to ring this up, Walt. And then she said, she says, I rang 50 cents when I should have rung $5. Well, I said, that don't make any difference, Lucy, to us. I said, leave that door open now, Lucy, so we can see what kind of beer you got in there. She says, okay, take your choice, Bohemian, Highlander, and there's some Schlitz back in there. And she says, we keep Coca-Cola, too, for the people who don't drink. So thank you, Lucy. I says, get over to that piano and play Roll Out the Barrel. And boy, could she play. I wish I could record the music that she played. She was wonderful. And Bud says, all right, Walt, I'll sing a little song with that there, too. And this is Bud, the keeper of the tavern. Now, who is this? Porky LaChelle and his wife, Lavelle. She used to be one of the Estes girls at Alberton. And they married, and they lived over there at Davie. Porky, one of the finest fishermen that the country's ever seen. And he's got his pole and he's got a basket of fish with him up at the tavern. I says, okay, we'll come over and look at them, Porky, but why don't you bring them out here and lay them on the table, and I'll try and get a close-up of them. He says, okay. So he's got the fish there, and he's beginning to handle them, and he'll lay them out there on the table. We'll pick up the picture. Lavelle says, that's mine for supper, Porky, she said. Anyway, here comes the fish out. Look at the nice sized trout. No, he didn't violate any fishing law that day, because there in the tavern was the, one of the game men, the forestry. Hey.
There we go.
Now they got their trout strung up there on a string, but I only got their heads. Now here we are with Chester Freeman, Porky Lachelle, and Lavelle Estes. Now the forest ranger, there he is to the right, he's there, and he says Porky didn't violate the rules. And he's got that basket in there, putting there full of fish, but they're all the proper size. And they had a good time talking about it. Hello, Chester, to the right there. Hello, Porky. Hello, forestry man. And there's Chester Freeman again, and Porky is going to sing a song. Oh, I don't know what it was. It was Roll Out the Barrel, I think is what they were trying to play. And the little fella down there at the right. Now, you know, every town has, in the mountains, they have a dump. And that dump is always a feasting place for the bear. Here's a great big black bear that was down there, and I went up to get his picture. I threw him a crust of bread, and I wasn't very far from it, so you can see that old Walt Miller, he's pretty brave at that with his camera. I'm glad he didn't take a swipe at me. So he went his way, and I went mine. Now, this is a picture of the Avery, Idaho, in that winter of 48 and 49. This is looking down from the hillside. And there's the old depot over there in the store, and up in the hills there is the remount station and the forestry station. And here is the substation, electrical substation. And looking westward again, from about that point is the bridge that the CC's built back there in about 1926. And here's the swinging bridge. I mustn't leave that out. Swinging bridge across the St. Joe. Now, later on, the spring begins to set in. And you can see where the water is building up, and it pushes holes in through the ice. This is a bright, sunny day, and gives it all a fantastic look. You can see it and see for yourself there. And over through there, if you look fine, you can see the old railroad grade passing underneath there. Now, Avery's population comes and goes. Her railroad changes in operation. Her mountains remain constant, but the shadowy St. Joe flows on. Here, we call these here in the spring of the year, certain times it'd be called like lily pads coming down. And the high water would carry them down there, and they would clink along the banks. It sounded like music. It was a fascinating thing, and everyone liked that time of the year. So there is a train up in there. Could you see the train there? Anyway, you're right alongside of the Milwaukee Railroad with your shadowy St. Joe River. This is a pretty day. The sun shining. The water even looks blue. And there's the snow line along there. Now, this is Avery, Idaho, the old depot of the long ago. And there to the right was the fish pond. And there is the substation that handled the electric motors. And going along here on the back end of that caboose, pictures taken of the condominiums. The railroad company built these places for the employees to live in on account of shortage of room in this narrow canyon. The section bosses and the engineers on the helper crews, one thing or another, lived in those places. They were a very comfortable place. Now here we are. Over to your left-hand side, you'll see on track one there is Harvey Clemens's old equipment, the ditching machine and all that. There's the ice house over there, and up at the east switch, that bridge over the east switch there. And then this brings this portion of the picture pretty well to a close with a sunset. Now, years later, I come back to Avery, Idaho from California. Mrs. Miller and I, we stop at Avery, Idaho to get a few final pictures. There's the old schoolhouse again, and there's that bridge, and there's still traffic traveling over that. The forestry uses it, and the big logging company of St. Mary's gets their logs down over through there. You can see the substation up there, you can see the substation of it through there. And here is one of the old stores that Curly Etten used to run in them days. Now here is the home of the youngest of the pioneers. His name is Terryalt, Harold Terryalt, the youngest of the pioneers. And I say, Harold, wave up there, will you? One final picture for this Milwaukee picture. And he did. Anyway, I turned my camera around just to get another final picture. And here, up from the roundhouse, came an electric motor that was serviced, and coupled onto it was a diesel electric. They are synchronized. Here's the Avery Depot, and this is the last crew that went out of there. Donald Hyde over to the left, great big giant of a man, and myself and Sweet Hansen. They are the crew, and the last picture I took of Avery, Idaho, of any of the crews of the old days. So they couple onto that train a little later on, and they leave. And I leave too, and I take some final pictures from the bridge at the east end. Look at the railroad yards there. They're all empty. And soon they will be pulled out and the whole place abandoned. The electric poles all taken down. And this will say farewell to the old railroad at Avery, Idaho. Thank you.
This familiar Missoula landmark has a dual personality. It lives in the present, and yet through some time-consuming effort has successfully maintained its link with the past. These days, it houses one of Missoula's finer restaurants, but it was built around the turn of the century as the depot for the Milwaukee Railroad. It maintained that status for about 75 years. The following is an account of what the depot once was and how it made the transition to what it is today. Any discussion about the history of the depot, of course, is closely linked to the operation and eventual failure of the railroad it was constructed for. Mired in bankruptcy, the Milwaukee Road shut down, and the last train rolled away from the depot in March of 1980. In the final years leading up to the closure, the structure stood largely vacant, silent. The railroad tracks were neglected, twisted by the lack of money and manpower. Death was imminent. But it wasn't always that way. The Milwaukee was once a proud railroad. The depot was once a busy, thriving hub to the Missoula community. Myrtle Hamilton was the depot's rate clerk and worked for the Milwaukee for 49 years. Dwight Rittenhouse was an engineer and put in 40 years. They remember the stability, the life the depot once stood for.
It was quite a deal in those days to have a steady job, and it was a good paying job for those days.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed working there, and I enjoyed everyone. I remember Al Colhays. Wasn't he a wonderful superintendent?
It was a well-kept place and had beautiful grounds on it. They had flowers that was always planted, and they chipped in exotic plants, and that hillside was always well-kept. It was a beautiful spot, and it was just a joy. We used to ride the train from Deer Lodge when I was a kid and come to Missoula and get off and spend the day and just maybe fool around the depot for something to do because my dad had a pass.
But as early as 25 years ago, the first signs of the Milwaukee's demise began to appear. The last passenger train rolled by the depot in May of 1961. Staffing was cut back. The depot was remodeled. Management became more distant. The tracks deteriorated, and in 1980, the end came. But in less than 2 years, in December of 1981, the depot experienced a rebirth. It became a part of the community again, fusing together its railroad past and its restaurant future.
I suppose there was a degree of nostalgia about it in the fact that it was a vacant building, unused, and had some viable uses.
Bob Brew was the developer of the restaurant renovations. With sensitivity to the structure's architectural prominence and historical significance, he was able to bring the building up to current code without losing too much of its original flavor.
And this was one of their finer products architecturally. in their entire series of depots, as was related to me by the Milwaukee depot officials.
Development efforts were rewarded in April of 1982 when the depot made the National Register of Historic Places, a current Missoula business functioning successfully in a building that remembers the past.
I've gone down there to eat and enjoyed it, and I have memories when I go by there and wish I was still running up and down the track, but I'm glad they did the job they did, and that makes me feel good.
Oh, I think it's beautiful, and I'm so happy that they restored it like, you know, it looks like the old depot in many ways.
Now,
But
Bernie,
I can't bring myself to go down there.
I was just going to say, you're holding back on me. You haven't been down there yet, have you? Why not?
Too much nostalgia connected with it, I guess. I don't know why, but I just don't. And I have a gift certificate deed down there. Had it for 2 years.
What holds you back, Myrna? Why can't
I
you?
don't know, but I just can't bring myself to go down there.
Too many memories, huh?
Too many memories.